I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share one of your short exercises with the listeners so they can really get a taste for it.
Okay. Would you like me to run through that one I talked about where the
Yeah,
visualization?
I think
Okay.
that one sounded compelling and really accessible.
Okay. So, so for the people that are watching and listening, if you have pain, then if you could rate that pain out of 10 before we start. So 0 being no pain and 10 being the worst pain that you can imagine. Of course, it's subjective. Now, you could also use this for an emotional pain as well, but for now, I'm just talking about physical pain.
Welcome to the Dr. Eleanor Stein podcast. In this show, you will hear expert medical professionals, researchers, and people with lived experience share science-based, low to no cost strategies to help people with complex chronic diseases. Listen in for another dose of education, empowerment, and hope. Hi, everybody. I am Dr. Ellie Stein, the host of the Dr. Eleanor Stein podcast. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a medical doctor and recently retired psychiatrist. Due to my own lived experience with myalgic encephalomyelitis, fibromyalgia, multiple chemical sensitivities, and much more, I ended up devoting the last 25 years of medical practice to patients with these conditions. On this podcast, you will hear diverse voices from researchers, clinicians, and patients themselves, sharing their expertise and hope, as well as a bunch of practical tips to empower you to recover and regain your life. I am thrilled to welcome to this inaugural podcast my friend and colleague, Jane Hogan. Jane is known as the wellness engineer because she left a successful 30-year engineering career to become a functional medicine certified health coach, certified yoga teacher, and wellness educator. So you can guess there's a bit of a story behind such a dramatic transition. Jane blends proven leading edge science and ancient wisdom traditions to help people release chronic pain. I love that word release, using the mind, the body, and the breath. Jane, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Ellie. I'm so happy to be here and honored to be your first guest. So, yeah, really thrilled.
Awesome. So I wonder if you can start by sharing a little bit of your story. It's pretty dramatic, and I think it gives credibility, right? It lets the listeners know you know where they are and where they've been. And it also gives people hope because if you and I can recover, and I don't know, I'll just speak for myself. I was sick for a really long time. It just lets people know that what's possible.
Mm, yeah, so I was kind of carrying on with my engineering career. I became an engineer because I was a good daughter. My father wanted me to do that. And I liked it. I did like my career. Um, but then I had a really stressful year. It began with my mother dying suddenly, and then I had to deal with, well, we were very close, so I had a lot of grief, but I also had her house. My parents had lived there for 50 years. They were collectors, so it was
Mm,
filled with collections. And I have two older siblings and a younger sibling, so I had a lot to deal with. And if anyone's ever dealt with that kind of dealing with the contents, it's there's stuff that comes up. And so I wasn't sleeping. It was also a 7-hour drive away from where I live. So I wasn't sleeping. I was trying to work and look after all this and just in a lot of stress. And so about a year after it began, I was just coming to the final stages of divulge just divesting of all the contents and selling the house and so on. And I started getting this joint pain that was just super random. It was in one shoulder one day, and the next day it'd be in an opposite elbow, and knees and feet and hands
mm.
and jaw. It was just all over the place. And I thought, okay, I've been under a lot of stress, and all I need to do is get this taken care of, take some vacation, and I'll be fine. And so I did. The house was sold, got rid of the contents. I took some vacation, and I got worse.
That's
The
such, I
inflammation.
just have to say that's such a common story, right? People think they just need rest, and yeah, that's going
Yeah.
to be enough.
And it certainly wasn't. And I I remember waking up one morning, my husband had gone to work and I was like, sleeping in to try to rest, except I hadn't even slept the night before because pain kept me awake at night. And I was lying there thinking, how did my life come to this? I was healthy and strong 3 months earlier. And I started thinking, if this is the way my life is going to be, because our kids had just flown the nest. We had an empty nest. Retirement was just around the corner, really, just a few years away. And, we worked all our life for retirement and had plans to travel. And I remember thinking, I don't want to be in life if this is how I'm going to be, because I'm not going to be able to do all these things that we had planned to do. And I'm just going to be a burden for people. And I'm like, ready to be done. I wasn't really suicidal, but I was on that path. And in the next moment, I know it's going to sound weird, but I heard a voice in my head, but it wasn't my voice. And it said, you're going to figure this out. Your life is not meant to turn out like this. You are going to figure this out and you are going to teach other people.
Wow.
And I just knew that. From then on, I knew it. So I was still in pain, but I wiped my tears and I was like, okay, I'm going to figure this out. And I had that deep inner knowing that I would. And I think it was a couple of days later that I had an appointment with my family doctor, and she had been testing my blood and everything, and nothing came back. So nothing was showing, but yet I had inflammation, the size of golf balls on my knees, and my hands were swollen, and I just had so much, I could barely walk. My feet were so swollen. I had no grip strength in my hands. I couldn't even, like, those clips to put your hair up. I couldn't even squeeze one of those. I could barely hold on to toilet paper. This is a problem, right? When you're not able to take care of yourself. And so my doctor said something that at that time, this is 2016, I'd never heard of this. She said, sometimes foods you eat can cause joint pain. I'm like, what? I'd never heard of this. Gluten and dairy, she said, were the most common. So I just had no idea what I was doing. I was like, okay, I'll cut out gluten and dairy. So I did. And I did have a reduction in pain within 5 days. Like, it wasn't gone.
Wow.
And I still had inflammation, but I had less pain. So I started feeling very empowered then. Plus I had this inner knowing, that voice that said I was going to figure it out. And so it just started me down a path where I discovered functional medicine, and I started working on a lot of things. I was really like working on the physical, I would say, I was working on sleep and I was working on food. And then I found out I had SIBO, small intestine bacterial overgrowth. So I thought, okay, just got to get that cleared up and then I'll be fine. So then I'm like a year and a half later and I'm better, but I still had pain and inflammation and with rheumatoid. So, and I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis along the way. And when rheumatoid arthritis is very scary because they say there's no cure, and they really want you to go on the meds right away because they say you'll have permanent joint destruction. And so I didn't want to go on the meds. That was just my personal choice. The side effects really scared me. Cancer was a side effect. And so I really didn't want to go on them, and I was having progress. So I was okay with that, but I had a lot of fear about, are my joints going to be permanently damaged? And anyway, and I had developed food fear. So I had all these fears. And now I know that that was actually making the situation worse because my nervous system was so in a state of fight or flight because I was so afraid. And then I realized, actually, it wasn't probably just that last bit of stress in that last year. When I looked back at my life, I had mild childhood trauma, but I kept this dysregulated state of my nervous system really my whole life, simmering there, not feeling good enough, being the people pleaser, the good daughter, the perfectionist, being hyper vigilant, hyper independent. I mean, I did it all, right? With my kids, I was like president of the swim club, president of the chess club. All the fundraising, I did all that stuff. And as a working mother as well, I just was my whole life being so hard on myself. And so when I surrendered into that, then I could finally heal.
Wow.
Mm.
And how long has it been now, Jane, that you've felt well? Because I know your lifestyle. You're pretty busy and not being held back at the moment.
Yes, and I'm running now and hiking. We do
Yeah.
trail running. So I do a lot of stuff now. Yeah, I'd say it probably took me a good 3 years to really get well. And even now, I mean, these personality adaptation, actually they're behavioral adaptations, the people pleasing, perfectionism and all that. It's a response to stress, right? That childhood trauma of being, this is the only thing you can control when you're a child. You can't fight, you can't flee. So you develop the behavioral adaptations that protect you. And so I still tend towards those. I have to catch myself. And if I find
Right.
myself putting too much pressure on myself, like in the fall, I hosted a summit. I was traveling a lot. I had Christmas and all my kids coming. And, I started to get a little more pain again. And I go, okay,
Mm,
all right, all right. My body's talking to me, but I don't see it now. I don't go into that state of despair of, oh my goodness, what's my future going to be like? Now it's just like, okay, my body's talking to me. It's giving me messages and I need to honor that and slow down a bit. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm a work in progress. We're all a work in progress. But I would say I live basically a pain-free life most of the time, unless I start putting pressure on myself.
wow, that's really amazing and very hopeful for, I think, people listening. I
Mhm.
noticed you used the word trauma when you were referring to your childhood. And, in psychiatry, we talk sometimes about big T trauma, like being abused or neglected or being in a war, things like that. And then we talk about little T trauma. And I think what you're referring to is more little T, like
Exactly.
the convolutions we have to go to kind of fit into our family and society. And it sounds like you're feeling there's a connection between those mental gymnastics and perhaps developing symptoms later on. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I was definitely mild trauma, nothing. And so in some ways, we think if it's just mild trauma, it's like, well, that was nothing. So
Hmm.
my sibling teased me. Big deal. I'm 50 years old. I should be over that by now. Right? That's what we think. But as a child, when you're impressionable and before the age of 7, when your brain is very suggestible, as you know, you start forming beliefs. And so I formed the beliefs way back then of I'm not good enough or I'm not smart. I'm, crybaby, those kinds of things were the messages that I got. And so I stuttered. I didn't even feel like I
Mm,
had a voice. I stuttered when I was little and I don't really remember it. So there was definitely things going on there that got stored. And I realized actually, like when my mother died and we had a lot of sibling stuff going on, that it just really churned it up and brought it up again and realized, gosh, what's going on with me? I haven't dealt with this. I haven't forgiven really. And so forgiveness was part of it. It's part of the surrender, right? Is that
hmm.
forgiveness of realizing, gosh, he's just a kid. He's hurt people, hurt people. And so that is totally gone now. Like I don't feel I can talk about it now and not feel emotion around it. They say that's wisdom, right?
Hmm.
When you have memory without attachment. And that's how I
Right.
feel now. But I talk about it just so that people understand it doesn't have to be something big. It could have been one thing that, at school that happened that could create a belief in your mind about yourself that keeps that nervous system in that simmering state of dysregulation. And then as we go through life and we build on other stresses and events, and then it's like the bucket is full, can't take any more. And I think that's what happened when I look at it all. That's what I believe happened. And actually most people that I work with people with chronic pain, and I'll always
Hmm.
say, was there an event, 6 months, a year before the pain started, or even closer? And always, always there's something.
So that's really made you a strong believer in the connection between the mind and the body.
Yes, absolutely.
Because
There's
it's
no
still
doubt.
contentious, right? Like in the complex chronic disease community, some people are not comfortable with that
Yeah.
belief. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I can only go by what I've seen, and
Hmm.
that's what I've seen in pretty much everybody that I worked with. And I knew that it was the case for me. I knew I was healthy and then I was, not healthy. And what happened in
Right.
between was the stress. And I kept on saying, if stress turned this on, it should be able to turn off again.
Yeah. That's the beauty. When we figure out that the brain is involved, we actually have some influence over our brain, much
Yeah.
more influence than we have over our body. Like you can't look at your knee and say, okay, golf ball inflammation, go away, right?
Yeah.
I found that quite ineffective, but um, work identifying and working on, like what I heard you kind of talking about was a mindset that
Mm.
you couldn't fully be yourself and you had to kind of people please and be careful, right? That
It's
that
protection.
mindset of fear.
Yeah, it's protection. That's what our body is doing, our brain is doing. It's saying, okay, we need protection. So it starts to have protective behaviors, and then there may be protective physical stuff going on, like in terms of tightness, rigidity, and then it that might turn into pain, or it might turn into a disease. I mean, we know that when the nervous system becomes dysregulated,
Hmm.
that the immune system, the digestive system, and the hormonal systems are the first ones to kind of not operate properly, and then that has a cascade effect.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could say more. I think this term dysregulated nervous system, I mean, you hear it a lot of places now and kind of what it you've just started introducing it, kind of what it means to you. And how would someone know if their nervous system was dysregulated?
Yeah, I mean, I I often see it as, okay, first of all, we would see some of those behavioral adaptations
Hmm.
of the people pleasing, perfectionism, and so on, hypervigilance, really hyper independence, because we can't feel relaxed around people. So that's the
Mm.
way I kind of see that showing up first as
Okay.
behaviors. And then we might see it physically. So we might see rigidity, tenseness, right, in the body, tight muscles,
Hmm.
and then,
Restriction. Yeah.
yeah, restrictions, tight. Like depends. I find it always interesting too, the emotions and where they show up in the body. So often, like our language is so indicative. Like, oh, I got the weight of the world on my shoulders. Well, that person might end up with shoulder pain, right?
Yeah.
So that's the kind of things I see, that I believe, because it's what I saw myself. And when I do presentations, and of course, I attract people with chronic pain because they're the ones, they're coming to my events. And when I ask, who's got people pleasing, perfectionism, unable to set boundaries, you can't, don't want, you want to be polite and not rock the boat, that hypervigilance, hyper independence. I'll say, how many of these do you see? And everyone's like in the comments, all of them, all of them, all of them, all of them.
Right.
So they're recognizing it in themselves. And so I think if we can catch that early enough, but the people think it's their personality. They don't see it as what Gabor Mate calls a behavioral adaptation, which I like way better, because a
Hmm.
personality, we think we can't change it. A behavioral adaptation, we can change that. We can teach our brain new things.
And so what do you think is the connection between this, we'll call it fight, flight, fear kind of response and pain? Because pain is really what you work with the most, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there's probably it now, and I'm not a doctor, right? But this is my observation, and I've
Yeah.
interviewed hundreds of people now, and helped probably thousands of people. So what I've seen is that there's a few mechanisms. So first of all, there's when the nervous system is continually in that state of the stress response, then we could have the digestion go off, right? So then that could be, you're not digesting well, so you're not producing enough stomach acid. You're not, and then that can cause bacterial overgrowth, like I had,
Mm-hmm.
which can cause leaky gut, which then can lead to an autoimmune condition, right? So there's that mechanism. Then there's also the mechanism of people, once they get pain, maybe it was from an injury or a surgery or something, but once they get the pain, then they have fear about the pain.
Mm,
So they're wondering, okay, what's my life going to be like? And even with an illness, that's what I had with the RA, what's my future going to be like? This is going to be awful. I won't be able to do all these things. And our brain is wired to pay attention to things, fearful things, because it
yeah.
sort of means survival. And so then we make grooves. Well, not really grooves, but we're wiring those neural networks in the brain. So we're wiring together fear and pain, and then more fear and pain, and then
Yep.
more pain, more fear, more pain. So it just keeps going on this vicious pain fear cycle. So I think that's another mechanism as well that
Mm-hmm.
that seems to be predominant, and kind of sometimes they'll go together.
And I call that kind of the second layer. Like you've got
Yeah.
the underlying problems like the sore stomach or the inflamed joints. And then when the fear comes in and you hardwire
Mm-hmm.
fear and anticipation of disaster, and that's just like an extra layer in your brain and also an extra layer of suffering.
Oh, so much. It really is. And then it just sort of perpetuates itself and makes it worse and worse and worse. And then it it's hard for people, though, because one of the things we need to do is not think about the pain. Or we can also have practices where we notice the pain, but also recognize we're safe in this moment. Right. So we
How do you,
want to send.
yeah, how do you think, so kind of moving into, okay, what can we do about it? So we've established that I would say most of us have these small T traumas. Like there's not very
Pretty
many
much
people,
everyone.
I'm a psychiatrist, right? So I've talked to a lot of people about their lives, and we all have things that we've adapted our behavior to that have left us maybe not fully at ease. So I think
Mm-hmm.
this work, although you're speaking primarily to people with chronic pain, honestly, it's broader than that. It's
I
most
know
people, right?
it is pretty
Could
much everyone.
benefit, yeah, from
Yeah.
this information. And so
Yeah.
how do you get people to start thinking? So just as an example, just literally 2 hours ago, I got an email. I often get these emails from someone who's in despair. And in her very long email, she said, um, I know I'll never get better. I know there's nothing I can do. I know this is very serious. And so, how do you shift people? I mean, I would say that's a very fear-based perspective,
Yeah.
respectfully, because of course it's based on her experience, right? She didn't just make
Yeah.
this up. But how do you get people to start making the shift in their thinking?
Mm-hmm. Well, I do start with some education on
Hmm.
talking about the power of our mind to influence our physical body. So I talk about the placebo effect. I talk about
Yeah.
studies with multiple personality disorders where there's illness in one personality and not in another, like diabetes
Isn't
in
that
one person.
crazy?
It
Like, I
seems
know I've read
crazy.
those in actual science journals, right? You
I
just go,
know.
how is this possible? Yeah.
Yeah. And I talk about, for example, phantom pain or phantom
Hmm.
limb pain, where someone's had a limb
Yeah.
removed, no limb there, yet they are feeling the pain. I talk about things like stories about how people, say, in the backwoods somewhere, and they have an accident and they need to get out or they're going to die. And the brain turns off the pain so that they can get themselves
Yeah.
out. But as soon as they get to safety, the pain goes on. So I kind of do some education around that so that people understand your mind is powerful. It doesn't mean the pain's not real, but your mind has the ability to dial it up and dial it down.
Yeah.
So there's that. Um, so teaching them about the power of the mind. And then I also talk about, well, nervous system regulation. And basically, the only way we can heal is to get the nervous system back into the relaxation response. So as long as we're in the stress response, healing doesn't happen. And the only person that can do that is you. No one else can do it. Right. And it's not like, of course, you may go to a massage and feel pretty good for a little while, and that
Yeah, it's
works. But
so
if you,
temporary.
right, it's so temporary.
Yeah.
So it's really cultivating an awareness of what are your predominant kind of thoughts. What are you thinking most of the time? Because it's not what you do once in a while, it's what you're doing most of the time that's going to affect the nervous system, and then begin to downregulate that pain. And so, I do education around that, about
Hmm.
awareness. In my membership, I, talk a lot about awareness, and I also use some other tools. I teach people visualization techniques,
Okay.
and I start with that. And I actually do that on I do these webinars where I teach people this, and I run them through a little like 5-minute exercise where I say, rate your pain before. I
Hmm.
lead them through a visualization. What's something you would love to do that you aren't doing now, but you would love to do it? And so I take them
Okay.
there, bring in all the senses, and then I get them to feel the feeling in their body and use the breath to kind of amplify that feeling, teach their body what it feels like to have that experience, even though they can't have the experience right now. And afterwards, I get them to rate the pain again. And it's amazing. People went from an 8 to a 4, a 6 to a 2. And some people, one lady I remember, she said she had sciatica pain for 10 years. And in this
Wow.
webinar, it was gone, gone. So,
It's
and
amazing.
yeah, and there's a lot of science, as you know, of the brain retraining exercises, basically, and we know that this works. So I love to give them that little win,
Hmm.
and so that they can believe in themselves, so they have hope. And then
So, mhm.
when they come into the program, it's like, okay, now let's make this happen every day. Let's practice this. You have
Right.
to practice over and over again. And then I have other tools for, um, for reprogramming the brain with affirmations, for example. That's repetitive type of
Hmm.
way of reprogramming the subconscious mind, right? Because it learns through repetition. And I have other tools, and then I also have tools for, like, the times when you do feel despair. We want to feel that feeling and let it go. We just don't want to stay there. So I have some
Right.
tools for that as well. So
So to feel it and then let it go.
feel it and let it go. Yep.
Yeah.
It's very much about connecting with the body as well, because, doing that mind body connection,
Hmm.
and getting in touch with our body, because most of us are in our heads most of the time. And probably is what got us to where we are. And it's really served us well for a lot of our lives, but it doesn't
Yeah.
serve us really well when it comes to healing the body.
So Jane, when I was anticipating and preparing to have you on today, I thought to myself that you're the perfect first guest, because I couldn't agree with you more. Regulating the nervous system is like step one, and all the fancier, mental, cognitive, emotional, medical interventions that we might do are going to have such a better chance of working.
Yeah.
Well, really an only chance of working if our nervous system is calm, because we can't
Mhm.
really rewire when we're in fight or flight. So nothing can change. It's like we're locked in.
Exactly. And,
Yeah.
what I was doing, say, with, trying to eat an anti-inflammatory diet, and then I ended up with this small intestine bacterial overgrowth. I was just creating more and more fear, and I wasn't digesting my food well anyway. No, we can't digest our food and absorb nutrients well if we're not in a relaxed state. So
Yeah.
actually, the first thing I teach about food is being calm while you're eating,
Yeah.
eating
Yeah.
slowly, feeling good, feeling gratitude about the food that you're eating. That's a starting point, really. People think, and I thought, to cut out gluten and dairy. And yeah, it was helpful, but I think when I look at my whole path, if I had started with nervous system regulation, my healing would have been much faster.
Right. I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share one of your short exercises with the listeners so they can really get a taste for it.
Okay. Would you like me to run through that one I talked about where the
Yeah,
visualization?
I think
Okay.
that one sounded compelling and really accessible.
Okay. So, so for the people that are watching and listening, if you have pain, then if you could rate that pain out of 10 before we start. So 0 being no pain and 10 being the worst pain that you can imagine. Of course, it's subjective. Now, you could also use this for an emotional pain as well, but for now, I'm just talking about physical pain. All right. So let's, yeah, close your eyes and just get really nice and
I do it
relaxed.
automatically.
Yeah. Get nice and relaxed and just notice that you're supported. You're sitting on a chair or you're lying down, fully supported. And then just notice what your hands are resting on. Maybe they're resting on your lap or by your side, but they are also supported. And then notice your breath. You don't have to change it. Just notice that there's always air for you to breathe in. And you can release it, and there's always another breath. There's an abundance of breath. There's an abundance of support for you, always there. And now I'd like for you to think about something you would love to do that you can't do now because perhaps pain is holding you back. So, whatever it is, maybe it's playing with grandchildren, maybe it's playing a sport that you haven't been able to do. For me, it was hiking a mountain. Maybe it's just walking down the beach and feeling good. Whatever it is, bring that to your mind now. And notice what's around you. Notice if you're indoors or outdoors. Notice if there's anyone around you or are you alone. Notice the colors that you see. Notice the intensity of the colors. Notice the touch of your clothing on your skin. Notice the surface that you're on. Maybe you're sitting or walking. Notice what's on your feet. What about sounds? What sounds are around you? Can you hear people talking or sounds of nature or music? Or maybe just the sound of your breath. And what do you feel on your skin? Can you feel a breeze or a sense of warmth or coolness? Are there any fragrances or subtle aromas, maybe salt air? Maybe there's nothing, and that's something to notice too. Do you notice any tastes? You may or may not. Whatever it is fine. And now notice the emotion in your mind, the word of the emotion that you're feeling. Is it joy or exhilaration or contentment, excitement, or some other emotion? What is that emotion? Let's go with the first thing that pops in your mind. And now notice the feeling of that emotion. So switch from thinking about this to feeling in your body. So somewhere in your body, tune in to notice where you're feeling this. It could be in your throat or your heart, your belly. Just notice it. And if you're not sure, just pick one. So, this feeling that you're feeling, imagine that you can breathe into the area where this feeling is. And every time you inhale, this feeling gets bigger. With every inhale, you can let this feeling double in size. Just use your imagination and go with it. And double again. And it may get so big that it's even bigger than your physical body. And it can be. And then you can let it double again and gets even bigger and eventually could even fill up the room that you're in. This beautiful feeling all around you. You're bathed in it. And now we want to call this feeling back. So imagine that you pull this feeling back into your body, that to that first spot where you felt it, and say, this is for me, this is mine. Pull it back so it's a dot. And you can imagine that that dot has a color, or it could be sparkly, it could be a light. Whatever it is, this is now tucked inside you. And it's always there. At any time, all you have to do is breathe into it just like we did before. And with each breath, you can double it in size and double it in size. Make it as big as you want, and then pull it back again. It's always there for you. Now, knowing that that beautiful feeling is tucked inside for whenever you want it, and bring your mind back to this space, noticing your body and how it's supported again. And when you're ready, you can slowly and gently open your eyes.
Wow.
And now you can rate that pain again out of 10 and see, where is it? So Ellie, how was yours?
Well, I don't actually have any pain.
Yeah.
So I did the exercise. I pictured myself surfing, which is something I cannot do. Not due to pain, but just due to, I think, general lack of coordination. But it always looks so fun. So I pictured myself out there, in the surf with just this sense of like overwhelming joy that I did it. I just rode a wave and I'm just feeling so successful and excited and like the sun is shining and it was in my chest. And I just thought, oh man, this is the best. I was really able to get there. You narrated it so beautifully. I just thought, yes, yes, this is it. This is worth feeling. So I love the last part of the meditation where you kind of bring it back down to this little dot. Mine is red and silver sparkles,
Hmm.
and just hold it in my chest,
Yeah.
right? So that
Beautiful.
feeling, even if I'm not surfing, I can bring that feeling up whenever I want.
Yeah. And that feeling, of course, shifts the nervous system, right? Shifts it into the parasympathetic state, that so it's
Yeah,
regulating again. And so the more we can do that, the more we're regulating, right? So
yeah.
then we're shifting into the healing state. And so what I have a few more things that I add on to that for my
Hmm.
students, but um, this empowers them because it's just their imagination.
Yeah.
And so if we have the power with this is really the proper use of our brains, really, right? To use
Hmm.
our brain for creativity and for enhancing our lives instead of worrying. And so enhancing our lives with this feeling of empowerment, the feeling of regulation, we can let our body heal. So it's just such a beautiful way. It feels good. It should feel good to do this. So we just need to make time to do it. And that's just behavior change and new
Yeah.
habits. Yep,
Yeah,
that's
making time. I just launched a new course and took a whole bunch of questions from people, and probably the biggest challenge or obstacle they anticipated was how to get started and then how to make time and keep that commitment to daily practice. Um,
yep,
I really emphasize the daily practice. I'm not sure if you agree,
yep,
because we need to
multiple.
remind our body and brain constantly. Like
Yep.
you can't do it once a week.
No, it's got to be
Yeah.
daily. And actually, for most of the practices that I have, they're like 3 times a day.
Okay.
So it's in the morning, before going to bed, and then one other time. And I usually suggest like before a meal, because
Yeah.
then we're also getting the benefit of being calm right before eating. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's how it's like 3 times a day. And of course, our brain loves rewards. So anything you can do that's going to be a reward, like a little checkbox, or maybe you do even stickers, like we do with that's what I use with my kids when they were toilet training. Like, let's put some stickers on, right? So like anything at all. But we do need to recognize the wins and give our brain a reward. Another thing I've done, I don't have it here, but another
Hmm.
thing people can do is like put like a little bead in a jar every time they do it. And
Oh,
the
that's a great
brain,
idea.
yeah, the brain seeing those building up is enough of like, it doesn't need very much, but
Hmm.
some reward helps reinforce the behavior.
Yeah, I recommend exactly the same. I'm a big fan of the sparkly stars on the calendar. And that gives you a little hit of dopamine because you worked
Yep.
for it, right? So
Yep.
dopamine is something you get when you work towards a goal and you achieve it. And then the dopamine keeps you motivated. So now instead of creating the fight, flight, freeze, worry cycle, you're creating the success, empowerment,
Yeah.
dopamine. I can do this circle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that. And the more we can do that, the more we're going to want to do it. So it keeps reinforcing that good behavior. Another thing I love to do in my groups too is celebrating their wins, like
Yeah.
publicly celebrating their wins. And because that,
Yeah.
again, it's more,
Congratulating.
yeah, it's more reward. So the more we can reward our brain. And also, what I love about a group program is that then other people see, oh, wow, okay, this is working for them. Okay, I'll do that.
Right.
Um, well, there's one or two ways they can either go back to the old way of like, oh, it's working for them, for not for me. I have to remind them, okay, everyone's on their own journey. And that type of thinking is going back to dysregulation. So we want to try to stop that and get back into like what is going well. And the
And,
simple thing
yeah.
is gratitude, right? Just gratitude. Kind of, we did this in the beginning. You're
Yeah.
supported, right? You've
Yeah.
got a breath, always your heart's beating. I mean, our bodies are miracles. They really are.
I couldn't agree more. Like when I think of everything I've put my body through or my life experience has put my body through, and here it is working.
Yeah.
thriving, right? Allowing me to be traveling. For those of you who don't know, I'm in my van traveling. So if there's a few glitches in the internet, bear with them, hopefully. Yeah, you said a word early in the exercise, the word abundance. And I just stopped to write that down because I went, yes, the feeling of abundance
Hmm.
is like the opposite of fear.
It is. Yeah.
We've got everything we need. It's just such a powerful feeling. So I think as people are doing that exercise, if they can imagine they have everything they need to enable that experience, it's going to be very powerful.
And really, anyone that's watching or listening to this is more
Hmm.
abundant than most of the world's population.
Right.
We forget that.
Yeah.
Forget that we are so abundant. We do have so much. But I think a lot about these, pain and or love and fear, pleasure and pain,
Hmm.
abundance, lack, uh, regulation, dysregulation, right?
Yeah.
They're all on that
Opposites.
same opposites. Yeah.
I'm wondering just before, I mean, this has been fabulous, Jane. I'm so appreciative. More gratitude pouring out here. If there's any kind of last tips, I mean, you've already given us so much. And then I'm
Mhm.
going to ask you, how people can connect. You've given little hints,
Mhm.
tantalizing hints about what you offer.
Mhm. I'll come back to gratitude because
Okay.
that is kind of the easiest. Well, breath work is the easiest way to shift the nervous system. But when we get into gratitude, when people start having the lack thoughts or pain thoughts, to come
Hmm.
back to gratitude is always so powerful. I remember this with me when my hands are in a lot of pain, and I don't know who said it, where I heard it, but someone said like someone with no hands would happily
Mm.
take your hands,
Wow.
right? We forget.
Wow.
And so just
Yeah.
coming back to gratitude for what your body is doing, even if you do have parts of you that are in pain. John Kabat-Zinn said, as long as your heart is beating and you're breathing, there's a lot more right with you than wrong with you. So I think coming back to
Yeah.
that is really
On a really similar note, I've been doing groups for probably almost 30 years. And I remember in one group, a woman shared that she had been at the hospital visiting a relative, and the woman in the next bed was like on some kind of breathing, apparatus and had fear in her eyes and could barely breathe. And she and her friend who she was visiting just kind of looked at each other like, we can breathe, life is good.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. So to not take those things for granted and just feel gratitude.
I
So
love
yeah,
that.
my
Hmm.
my website is thewellnessengineer.com, and I have a YouTube channel, Instagram, Facebook at Jane Hogan Health. You should be able to find me, or the
Hmm.
Wellness Engineer. And I have a podcast which Ellie has been on called Wellness by Design. So any of those places are great places to follow me.
Fabulous. And can you say something about what you offer? You mentioned a membership, and it sounds like maybe you have some courses as well.
Yep, I have some DIY courses, but my main thing right now is a membership. I am moving into doing some small group programs where
Hmm.
I'll be doing some coaching, group coaching and private coaching tied in together. So we'll stay tuned for that. But I
Okay.
love my living pain-free membership. That community just fills my heart and soul.
And what do you do in your membership? What could people
I
expect?
I do a couple of group coachings a month. I have a wellness workshop every month with a guest expert. And I've got a core program that I call my design blueprint. So it's a 6-step path to
Hmm.
that pain-free life where we're really installing the habits. And then I have a monthly mindset lesson as well that we kind of deep dive. In fact, coming up
Hmm.
in February, the theme is gratitude. You can tell it's one I really like. So, but there's others like forgiveness, confidence, awareness, and so on. I just love diving into these and really helping reinforce that mind body connection.
And I get what I've learned, again, just to kind of agree with and reinforce what you just said is, the science is that if you're in an uplifted mood, whether it's all of those things that you just mentioned, confidence, joy, gratitude, abundance, you can't be in pain because they're firing different circuits and neurons can't do two things at once. So they're
Right.
really like people might think, oh, yeah, gratitude, schmatitude, but it's actually really powerful and there's biology behind why it works.
It's so true, Ellie. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, on that, I think that's a great place to kind of wrap up. So thank you so much for taking your time to share all your experience and wisdom. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ellie. This has been my pleasure. I love the great work that you're doing in the world, and I love your adventure that you're on. So
Thank you so
I
much.
stay tuned for that. All right. Take care.
Thanks for joining me on the Dr. Eleanor Stein podcast. I hope you are taking away new strategies and ideas to improve your health and a renewed sense of hope. Join me, Dr. Eleanor Stein, for our next episode. Can't wait? Check out my website for a wealth of free resources.